The Perth Freight Link stops short of one of its intended destinations, which is the Fremantle port. It stops short by about 500 metres to a kilometre. It stops just before the Swan River at Marmion Avenue. The rest of it has not been costed, so a bridge needs to be built across to get to the port. So the road will stop short. The second reason why the decision is demented is that the Fremantle port is expected to reach full capacity by the year 2021, and it's anticipated that the Perth Freight Link will be finished in 2020. At a cost of over, I estimate that this could go well over the $2.4 billion that is currently being bandied about. Let's get that figure into perspective, because the Fiona Stanley Hospital was built at a cost of about $2 billion. The Perth Stadium, which is currently under construction, is estimated to be costing about $1.5 billion. Now those pieces of public works are estimated to last for generations. The Perth Freight Link is likely to be redundant 1 year after it's built. And there's a lot more that will be said tonight about the Perth Freight Link, and I have a few slides which I will quickly rip through. But the Perth Freight Link is going to rip through residential suburbs, it's going to rip through the Bel Air wetlands, it's going to rip through homes, and it's going to go through a lot of residential areas that it doesn't need to go through. And there is a very simple solution, we believe, other than building the Perth Freight Link, and that's the proper construction of an outer harbour in the Kwinana area. There is no need for this road, absolutely no need. I think it will transpire that the construction of this road will be one of the greatest wastes of Australian taxpayers' money ever, because we are talking around... And these are some of the issues we believe that are very important in considering whether this is a sensible project. The environmental issues, the planning, the massive increase in trucks, the effect on health and our community socially. What will happen to all the children trying to attend the schools along Stirling Highway when there's more and more trucks? What will happen to the commercial properties along Stirling Highway that are trying to compete with the trucks? You can judge that by looking at Great Eastern Highway. That, in my view, is a very ugly, it's not user-friendly.
And that doesn't actually impact Cottesloe or North Fremantle or these areas, but it does impact Fremantle and Palmyra and people living along Leach Highway in particular, or through Coolbellup. That's the implication for them. So it's very, very dramatic for people who have families and have lived in streets sometimes for decades. But that's one aspect of it. I just wanted to start my address by saying about 15 years ago, when I was a relatively junior Member of Parliament, I went on what's called a political exchange to Japan. And when I was in Japan, I had lots of briefings, and the Japanese are amazing people, but they have a political system in which you have to get re-elected, you have to prove achievement. People like to see sort of a testosterone-driven political environment by which you prove your achievements. And so I had a briefing from a couple of very senior LDP, they were called, Members of Parliament. They showed me photos of highways they were getting built in their constituencies to prove their achievements. These highways finished at mountains, and there was no tunnel or anything, it just finished at a mountain. And I said, well, how much is that? Oh, that's 60 billion yen or something, you know, the equivalent billions of Australian dollars, but it just finished there. And there was big signs at the end saying that's the end of the highway, it just stops there. I said, well, why are you building that? They said, because we're proving our achievements. And we all, the young Australian politicians who were there, laughed. And we thought this was a bit of a joke. But after we walked out, the Australian embassy officials who were with us said, no, that's exactly what happens in Japan. You prove your achievement, you get some infrastructure built, you show you can get things done. Doesn't matter where it goes. I never imagined that would happen in Australia. But 15 years later, I've discovered that it does. And so what we have here, I can't begin to compete with Peter Newman's excellent presentation on it, but I just want to raise a few facts about it. Fremantle Port currently has about 700,000 containers go through it. Most of them, 90% or thereabouts, are transported to and from the port by truck. Under the current plans for Fremantle Port, its capacity will expand to 1.7 million containers. So that's when they think it will reach capacity, 1.7 million. It's currently 700,000. That's another million containers to go through Fremantle Port. There is no way that if you spend $2 billion or thereabouts on a road, you're going to put any significant effort to getting more containers on rail, because you basically don't have the money to do so. And the only way you'll get any more containers on rail is to put in place a new traffic bridge. And as we know, the existing Fremantle traffic bridge is pretty decrepit. I went for a walk under it the other day. It is decrepit. It was built in 1939. The only way you can get more rail freight into Fremantle Port is to have a new traffic bridge and therefore be able to separate your rail lines so that you have two rail lines in and out. Now, that's a real plan, and that would actually deal with a very significant issue, which is the Fremantle traffic bridge, which is old and tired, and according to a report that the state government itself submitted to the Commonwealth, it's in danger of collapse. Now, that report was on the front page of the West Australian the other day. It's not just me saying. A significant report that said it's in danger of collapse if it's hit by a vessel of over 42 tonnes. The Rottnest ferry weighs about 110 tonnes, just so you know, the one that goes through back and forth all the time. So that's the problem. So the problem in a nutshell is if the port goes to 1.7 million containers from 700,000 now, that's a hell of a lot more truck movements on the roads. Now, even if you build the Perth Freight Link, the government's own modelling shows that more than 40%, there'll be more than 40% what they call leakage from the road. So 40% of 1.7 million is more than the current trucks going into the port. So that means there's more truck movements. There's more truck movements than there are today. And as you know, if you want to avoid paying a toll, what do? You drive the roads that don't have the toll. We don't have tolls in Western Australia, but you go to Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne. If you want to avoid a toll, you don't drive on the road. You go somewhere else. So what will that mean? More trucks on the roads that aren't the freight link. So that's the nub of the issue in a nutshell. The other part of it is this: if you actually want to spend public money wisely, you should plan for the long term. $2 billion is a lot of money. It's a lot of money. About half of it, the reality is it's between 1.6 and 1.7 billion currently on their figures. If you actually want to extend it through to the port, it will be the figure that John Hammond outlined, 2.4 billion. So that's, if you actually want to get it through to the port, it'll be at least that. 2.4 billion goes a long, long way towards getting more freight on rail and to getting the process in place for a new port in Kwinana. 7 years ago, I was a cabinet minister, and I sat in cabinet one seat up from Alana McTiernan. She brought in on 4 separate occasions a cabinet submission, we had to get it right, about a new port in Kwinana, and we ticked it off. That was July 2008, and in August 2008 I stopped being a cabinet minister. And so that was the long-term plan. And if you do build a new port in Kwinana, and that's near where I live at Rockingham Beach, right near where I live, I'm not afraid of it. I think it's a good idea. You actually solve the long-term freight issues for Perth for the next 100, 200 years, because you've got a big new port facility without the constraints of Fremantle. Now that's not to say that Fremantle Port won't continue to operate, but there's no way. It will be a much smaller operation, probably than it currently is, and you saw the figures there before, for a very significant period of time. But you have competition in ports, you have a sensible economic outcome in which you get imports and exports out with some competition, and a port in Kwinana that can deal with both bulk and containers. Sensible solution. Now it is expensive. Someone will probably ask me that. It's expensive. But throwing between 1.7 and $2.4 billion on a road that doesn't achieve anything is a hell of a down payment on a new port in Kwinana, in my view. So that's another issue. We've heard it, and Peter explained it extremely well. There's some people who are going to suffer far more than the people up here, and they're the people who are going to lose their homes. And so there's people all over the metropolitan area. It's bringing people together from the western suburbs, from the Fremantle area and across. And all of the excuses the government's using, I don't think cut any mustard. They don't cut any mustard. It's not going to get trucks off our road. It's going to introduce tolls for the first time. It's going to damage the Belia wetlands. It's going to cost the taxpayers a fortune. And it doesn't deal with the real issues, which is a new Fremantle traffic bridge, more freight on rail, and a new port in Kwinana. Thanks very much.
Aren't we, from the Belia wetlands, and yet we've packed out a room in Cottesloe. How many people are local to kind of this part of town? Way over half. It's really much appreciated, and as someone who spent a lot of my early years around Bibra Lake and North Lake in the wetlands, I just want to say thanks, because as John explained, there are second order effects. You know, there are things that if they happen a bit further south and east of here will eventually really disrupt this community. But I also kind of get the sense that we're building solidarity right across town. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. 30, Kim will tell me if I've got this short. Are we 30 local government authorities and community groups going up? It's worth checking, because every time I ask there's more. Local campaigners and people who've kind of been at this, whether for the defence and preservation of their backyard or for those kind of wider public interest issues that others have acknowledged. Councils and local government, and I don't think it's any coincidence at all that the tier of government that is closest to the people, that is drawn from local residents, are the ones who are stepping up most strongly. So particularly we've got representatives and mayors here and councillors from Freo, from East Fremantle, from Coburn, and from most recently Kwinana, and Peter put up a slide of some of the more recent work that's been produced by Kwinana. And even we are told, although I missed the meeting, a bit of an uprising, a bit of a riot in Melville, at which the mayor was rolled by his own colleagues. You can clap at that if you like. But I do want to thank those councillors and the staff and those who... It's not easy, I get how difficult it is and how threatening it can be to step up in the face of the sort of, frankly, intimidation and some of the bullying that's occurred, but good on you for doing that. We're also blessed, I think, with people like Peter and his colleagues out at CUSP, with some of the best transport and land use planners, not just in the state but in the country, who are doing, you know, taking up work that was started years ago, actually, I believe under the latter years of the Court government, in progressing that outer harbour, and then actually ground truthing that work, getting it costed so that, so that we can actually see it tonight, so we can look at alternatives. It's not enough to just say what we're against. We've got to be able to come up with coherent ideas of what we're for. So I want to thank Professor Newman and his team, Cole in particular, for doing that work. You know, good on City of Fremantle for commissioning it so that it could be done, but bringing that expertise to bear on the alternatives so that we actually have something to bring forward. But here's the thing, and I'll turn to some of the federal issues. We've kind of got them a bit on the run. I think this whole, actually we're not going to do the freight link. We'll just smash up the wetlands and then we'll work out what happens after that. Strategy is a sign that we are succeeding. It's a sign that we're winning. Can I get a quick show of hands? Who thinks the Perth Freight Link, as you've seen on the maps tonight, is just a terrible idea? Just terrible. Okay, good. So I'm not going to go any further into why I also think it's a terrible idea. We just agreed it's bad, that there are alternatives. And I think we need to proceed with caution, quite frankly, with some of those. The seagrass in Coburn Sound has copped an absolute flogging in recent decades. I am personally a supporter of the outer harbour, but I think we should assume and insist actually that that goes through the same process of proper community consultation, of social impact assessment for people who live close to the impact area, and of environmental impact assessment that we would subject any other major project of its type to. So that notwithstanding, there are alternatives, and we can kind of see that there's a way forward, because as Peter and others have identified, they're planning on doing that anyway. They're planning on pushing $2.5 billion into a pile and setting fire to it first, and then we get to the Outer Harbour proposal, which is also going to cost a significant amount of money. But federally, with my ALP colleague Senator Glenn Sterle and all 8 of the Senate crossbenchers, do you know how difficult it is to get those 8 special individuals to all agree on any given thing? All 8 of them agreed, with the Labor Party and with the Greens, that the extraordinary lack of transparency and disclosure that we've seen in this project needed a bit of an extra shove, a little bit of an extra push, a bit of a shunt, as it were. And that's why we're bringing the Senate inquiry here in a month or so. So you've got until, and I actually did bring notes, I'm not going to ad-lib the entire thing, 13th of September, thank you, to make a submission. Please do. It doesn't have to be long and polished and technical. You can point to good sources if you want. It can be a letter from yourself, either as a resident or somebody expressing the wider public interest, to that Senate inquiry as to why, as to whatever your views are. And then I believe we've set aside October 7 as a date for a hearing. That's a full day. And same, I guess, as John and the association here did tonight, we will be offering the opportunity for Premier Barnett, for the Transport Minister, for Main Roads, a seat at the table. If this project is so great, if that benefit-cost ratio is justified, then put some evidence up on the wall. For heaven's sake, show us the assumptions, show us the modelling, and tell us what this damn thing is ultimately going to cost. So that's one opportunity. They may choose not to do that, and the Senate, in my view quite rightly, can't compel a state minister or indeed a premier to attend. It's an invitation to actually tell us the other side of the story, because it's actually not out in the open at the moment. And what we have, I think, is going to be an opportunity to get to the bottom of that last 500 metres to a kilometre. I live in North Rio on Stirling Highway, and I am deeply concerned because the whole thing appears to have been designed to be able to sling a B-triple road train around a corner at 70 kilometres an hour. Now, what is going to happen when that thing hits Tideman Road, where you've got basically 2 90-degree turns to get into the port? Either a gargantuan traffic jam, or they have to smash that thing through North Rio some other way. I don't think it's at all plausible that they don't know what they're going to do in Fremantle when they actually get across the river. So as this thing smashes through the wetlands and disfigures all those other neighbourhoods, there is a plan there for North Rio that nobody's seen yet, and that's one of the things that we want to get out in the open. But we also know that the fortunes of this part of the world are intimately tied to that as well, whether it's hardening up Curtin Ave and turning that into the sort of northern extension of the Freight Link, or these proposals that are on the planning books for widening Stirling Highway. Has everybody seen those? Absolutely mental. John used the word demented before. Wiping off every heritage facade between Freo and Nedlands and widening it up. The age of urban freeways is over. They figured this out in Portland in the early 1970s, and it's now the most livable city in the United States. And that, I think, is what needs to be our tipping point here in Perth. If you want to save Cottesloe, we've got to protect the Belia wetlands. If you want to protect North Fremantle, we have to protect the Belia wetlands. If your concern is for Palmyra or for Hammy Hill or for Coolabah, we have to protect the Belia wetlands. But the one thing that we must not allow the state government to do is to fool us into this false sense of security where they say, no, we're just going to do this row 8 bit and then everybody else can kind of chill out. We'll figure something else out after that. It all starts there. If they get that bit, the rest of us are buggered. So we absolutely need to stand up with the Save Belia wetland crew. That's where we have to make our stand. And Alana McTiernan, a federal member for Perth, and one of my federal colleagues has been getting a flogging for taking the Fremantle Eastern Bypass off the state planning scheme. Thank goodness that she did that and is owed acknowledgement for that, and did that under, off the back of a sustained community campaign. Now it's time that we finish the job on behalf of those who've been working at this for 20 or 30 years. So what are we going to do about it? Quite a bit as it happens, because you folk happen to live in the electorate A of the Federal Foreign Minister, who's busy. She's overseas a lot of the time, but she still does respond to local constituents. But B, you are in the electorate of the Premier. Did anybody notice when push came to shove in Victoria last year over a hideously expensive tunnel that was going to disfigure Melbourne's northern suburbs, dramatically unpopular with residents? The Liberal state government signed them up to hideous break fees and contracts that bordered on corrupt, weren't quite, in case there's any lawyers in the room, didn't actually say they were. And the incoming Andrews government, again to its great credit, said we made a commitment before the election. That freeway project changed the government, changed the state government in Victoria. That's our job here and now. If they won't listen to reason, that's fine. We'll find ourselves a state government that will. That's entirely plausible. The other thing that you will find in that little package is this, because there are 3 tenderers lining up, where that $2.5 billion doesn't actually get pushed into a giant pile and set fire to, although they might as well. It goes to these huge engineering companies and contractors, the people who pour the concrete, the people who would still be gainfully employed in setting up Tonkin Highway and rail link down to latitude 32. There's still going to be work for the engineers and the architects and the road builders and the rail builders, but not this. So if you could maybe post these, or maybe even make a call, or invite yourself into their office for just a quick meeting and a quick chat, that this is one tender you don't want to win. Nobody should be lending their corporate name to this kind of madness. And the last thing I want to do, and it's so much easier to ask for money for other people rather than myself. I'm normally really awkward about money, but not if it's for the kind of people who are driving this campaign along. We might be at this for another 18 months, because that's how far away the next state election is. And Mark will correct me if I'm wrong, but a little way away. This probably isn't going to be finished next week. I mean, maybe it will, but the campaigners who are doing the work and putting this stuff together, bringing us together tonight, putting in the submissions, just campaigning day after day, they are all volunteers and doing it for nothing. Kim has just strategically grabbed a bucket. What would be even better is your credit card details, weekly $50 donation, $1,000 checks. But quite seriously, the folks who are doing this work need our support. And the closer you get back to Belia wetlands, the more they're going to need the support. So if I could just encourage folks to be as generous as you can, because we've got to be in this for the long haul. We're going to push this, if we have to, up to and past the next state election and get this thing finished. We may well find these folks in the Supreme Court. That also costs a fair bit of money, but that's another story. So mostly I just want to say thanks. See you when we bring the Senate inquiry here. Thank you so much for being here, even though I know you are in fact sticking up for your own backyards. It has consequences, and it gives people strength, you know, all the way back down the corridor in the impact area of this project, that you're with us. It makes an enormous difference, and thanks very much for being here tonight.
As the biggest infrastructure project ever in Western Australia's history. That's the sort of money we're talking about. So we can't underestimate how important this is, just from a financial point of view. If I can now call on Councillor Jack Walsh to speak from a Cottesloe perspective.
Plans use a 42% leakage of traffic from the toll road to our local roads. We know that this project will cost millions more than the quoted $1.6 billion. We have to add to that the bridges, the tunnel, upgrading of Stirling Highway, Tydenham Road, and the typical cost blowouts of an unplanned finish. A dedicated freight road would make sense if it joined Roe Highway to the outer harbour, which the Main Roads report says will be operating in 2022. This should be combined with much greater use of rail, carrying freight.
We have $2.4 billion for something we do want to do, not something we don't want to do, given that it is still infrastructure.
Yes. Yes, good idea. Wish I thought of that. Unfortunately, I've seen media reports of Matthias Cormann and Julie Bishop saying that the road must go ahead. The money's been given, it must go ahead. I just think it requires a little bit more force back at them. It's not too late for this to end. If the Premier says he's not going to do it, well then it should end. But the federal government is saying the road must go ahead. The Premier is I've got a copy of his press release here, but in December last year, he did a joint press conference with Matthias Cormann, and they announced this project. They said contracts would be signed in November and December this year. They said, we'll go ahead, contracts November and December this year. So I don't think it's too late for it to be stopped, but tonight might help make a few decisions there. But Commonwealth should actually put money into things that are sensible.
Thank you, Mark. Any further questions? The gentleman at the rear. Yep.
Simon McGrath, Cottesloe. What do you see as the motivation for them pushing what plainly is a stupid idea? Why are they pushing this so hard?
Because I'm the non-politician, I can tell you the politics of this. The City of Melville ran several election campaigns run by the Mayor, Russell Aubrey, saying Melville should not have trucks. And the Treasurer, Martin Hahn, in his electorate, said that the seat of Riverton should not have trucks going through it. So they had a political commitment, they won their seats, and they said this needs to be done. So they took this campaign to the state government, the federal government, and a few people listened, and we've had the project developed from there. Because it was so NIMBY, just get it off here, there was no real planning for that. All the planning was for the outer harbour, just to do what we call the cap and transition strategy from Fremantle and develop it that way. So all the logic, the rationale was that way. The Perth Freight Link was never on the agenda for Infrastructure Australia to look at. It was just dropped. They had money. Let's give it and solve that political problem, even though it was a very small one and a very narrow one.
Probably a question more for Scott and the federal situation. There seems to be a cash splash by the federal government, and couldn't it be spent in much better ways, such as, instead of it being roads, what about port facilities? That would even seem to be more a federal sort of responsibility constitutionally, that the federal government deals more with the seas. Why not the money going to something in the seas, ports, instead of roads?
Yeah, a bit similar to the first question, I guess. I think what happened after the election was that we broke that attempt by the previous government to distance politics from very large-scale, long lead time infrastructure funding, whereby suddenly you could get that sort of thing that Peter's suggesting happened here out of Riverton and Melville, suddenly is the determining factor. So Infrastructure Australia wasn't perfect, but it did have that effect of being arm's length, and it was a bit mode neutral. So for example, we got the Commonwealth back into the business of funding public transport for the first time. So there's nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government can't fund light rail or a port or a freeway for that matter, or a gargantuan solar farm. The Constitution is silent on that kind of stuff. So that's why I suppose we've got to get that community voice back. We have to distance those sort of domestic political imperatives, which is, if anything, that's what I feel saddest about. Because the Freight Link, if you look at the EPA, the numbers that the EPA published when they assessed this thing, takes bugger all pressure off Leach Highway and Riverton. Those are the people who I feel are most sold out by this whole process, because this can do nothing to divert heavy vehicle traffic off of Leach Highway. The way to do that actually is not isolate, but is to identify Tonkin Highway and that dedicated rail link down to Kwinana. So yes, and these are very political question and a campaign question, is how do we get their attention loud enough, firstly in the political sense of it's going to be immensely damaging politically if you carry on with this madness, and secondly, actually we do have some proposals for what we would like that money to be spent on. And I feel like a lot of that work has actually already been done, but this is a campaign gathering. This is about leveraging that kind of...
Yeah, as planned.
Well, if they sign contracts at the end of this year, the next state election is 15 months afterwards, I expect construction will be underway significantly. Ripping up contracts is a tricky thing and can have severe financial consequences. So it's far better they just don't sign in the first place. And then you avoid those issues. One of the things the state government did was they only submitted one project to Infrastructure Australia. A project of this magnitude, you know, really helps if you've got Commonwealth money, and the Commonwealth's putting in 900 million of the 1.6 billion. The state's putting in the rest, despite our enormous debt levels. And but they only submitted one project to Infrastructure Australia, and that was this one. So Infrastructure Australia, the report was released through the Senate's pressure the other week. It said it wasn't able to compare this project for a cost-benefit analysis versus any others. So they could have submitted, you know, the whole Point Island Port thing we talk about, they could have submitted a new Fremantle traffic bridge and an additional rail crossing. They could have submitted all those things, but they didn't. They only submitted this project and said we want the money for that. Tony Abbott said he's the roads Prime Minister. He gave money to this.
I have a two-part question, more sort of Peter than you are technical aspects. You said 1.7 million containers, so on our working day, that's let's say 8 container trucks a minute. Would the Royal Highway extension, if it did go ahead, would it flow well with passenger cars or not? And then the next question is, would this toll road be only for trucks, or would we have to pay tolls in passenger vehicles?
The announcement from the Premier and the Nola on this was that it is a toll road only for trucks, and cars will be welcome to use this. The statement was also made, if the outer harbour is built and most containers are shifted from the Fremantle port and it gets redeveloped, then they'll need the highway to be able to get to the airport quickly. I thought they were building an airport train. Anyway, it is a big issue that would you go on a fast truck freight route, especially if it had B triples on it, like those road trains, and brave that. It's pretty hard on Leach Highway at the moment. I don't know if anyone goes down there in the mornings. It's a very significant task to take on the big trucks. It will be even faster. They will just get a speed up, and because there's no lights. So it will be a significant challenge, I think, to drive along. It is really meant for the trucks, but it can only be justified by putting cars in there as well. There is no freight roads that are built anywhere in the world, because you can't get a benefit cost ratio that would work. You need the cars on it, and but it will be interesting to see if they actually do use it. But it would make a lot more sense to direct that away from the city, not right through the middle of it. There were a lot of studies done in Elaine McTiernan's time when they were pushing the freight strategy to develop the outer harbour. They didn't resolve that issue because the best site was the Buckeridge site on the old BHP site there, so land-based, and that site they couldn't resolve with old Len, and that was a great pity. I think it was that really was an opportunity lost. It doesn't mean that you can't start talking now to resolve that, because that is still the best site. The other alternative was then to build a port in Cockburn Sound, and I just think that is crazy. That is just as crazy as this Perth Freight Link, because it was huge, the amount of land that would have to be built. And I do think that we've got to make sure, as Scott said earlier, that the outer harbour is built where there's plenty of space on the land and that it can be, there'll be some jetties going out, but nothing like the kind of project that was first thought up in those days. But it was even environmentally assessed, and it was very, very difficult to imagine it ever being built. So that is one of the reasons why we haven't had much progress on the Outer Harbour. But it is now back on the agenda. We must do the Outer Harbour. So let's solve that problem. State election, and it is after the time that the road should be underway. The federal election is next year. We've certainly got another by-election coming up. These are all opportunities to have a say. But I personally think the only real hope is with Colin Barnett, and that in that cabinet you can already see a division occurring. That Dean Orler and Matthew Cormann are saying they will build it, it's complete, it's going to be happening, and the Premier is stepping back and saying, well, we don't even know what we're going to build for that second part. And he said at the North Fremantle meeting, we probably should not have said in the press release that both stages would go ahead, because we didn't know what the solution was for the second stage. And he said, if there is not an elegant solution to that second stage, it probably won't get built. Now that is a door open, and it is an opportunity to push this further. I do think that that they had no idea that there would be this reaction. They were sold a pup. They didn't realise at the time, because there'd been virtually no planning done, of what the implications were. They're now seeing it. If they're sensible politicians, they will recognise that this needs to be abandoned. And all power to you for coming tonight, and just make sure it keeps going.
One, possibly two more questions, and that's it. We'll wrap it up. Simone,
can I just finish on that one? Yeah. Peter, it was a good question, and I thought the answers both to that and the one before were very good. If you think back to three things: shark culling, forced local government amalgamations, and the government's plan to rip up the solar contracts they had with existing customers in the budget before last. What happened at each of those three occasions? People went out there and had a go and protested. Shark culling is now no longer happening. Forced local government amalgamations is off the agenda until at least after the next election. And the plan to rip up solar contracts was ditched as well. So sometimes getting out there and having a go and protesting, like people have here tonight, pays dividends. And I can guarantee you this, I don't support this project. I've had a good hard look at it. You heard from my address earlier, I don't support it. If I'm successful, we would not be proceeding with it.
In the local papers and letterbox, which said, had a picture of a child in a car seat, and it said Roe Highway Extension Row 8, keeping our kids safe. And that is despite Perth Freight Link being within a kilometre of 22 primary schools and 9 high schools. A kilometre, so the sort of diesel fumes, etc. So the points that people have all made tonight about the Premier starting to retreat at this stage anyway from the second stage, so keen to go ahead with Row 8, but saying the second stage that will either take out houses in Palmyra or will be a tunnel option, and that community is tearing its hair out because people in White Gum Valley and Hamilton Hill are saying there's going to be a 6-lane truck tunnel under our houses. You know, I went to White Gum Valley Primary School, and those people did not know, have not been informed, that the tunnel option would go under their school oval, and there would be ventilation shafts and shafts and the like, so God knows what that would look like. So this has got huge implications across the board. That's why the Premier is now retreating from stage 2. But make no mistake, if stage 1, that is Row 8, goes ahead, stage 2 is just a matter of time. We will never be sure that stage 2 could not go ahead, whether it'll be the road option, whether it'll be the tunnel option, whether it'll be, and what impact it'll have on North Fremantle. And what is really significant about tonight is that it sends a message that people are realising that Perth Freight Link is not just a Fremantle issue, it's not just a Coburn or a Willagee issue, it's an issue for the whole of the metropolitan area, including the western suburbs, including people north of the port. So we've got a petition out there, a parliamentary petition, sign that. I urge you, there's lots of social media happening. So this is, I guess, another call to say, let's campaign, make a clear noise to Colin Barnett. I agree, I think he's significant. You've got a local council here. You should be talking to your councillors and asking what their position is and continuing to make noise at whatever opportunity we can, because we'll keep doing it until we win. Thank you.
To thank the professionalism of Kim Dravniks and her team of Rethink the Link. That's a couple of bouquets, but a couple of brickbats are about to follow, and one is the hopeless attitude of the Cottesloe Council towards this issue. Cottesloe Council, as I understand it, is probably the only council that has decided not to do anything about this issue. It's just put its head in the sand. So that is very unfortunate. I think we need to address that. Other councils all up the coast and down the coast are understanding what is happening. And my hat goes off to the City of Kwinana, the City of Coburn, and Mayor Logan Howlett is here tonight. They have put forward some wonderful alternatives to this Perth Freight Link. The only council that seems to have its head stuck in the sand is the town of Cottesloe. So I urge you all to write to your Member of Parliament, Colin Barnett. I agree with Peter Radican that he is a key player, and it's not about bagging him, it's about convincing him that this isn't the right idea. It's a bad idea. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.